Welcome to My Dental Hygiene School Experience, hosted by Dax Ska. The world of hygiene school can be wild. Hold on to your toothbrushes because we're going to dive into the chaos right now.
What's up, dental nerds? This is Dax Ska, dental assistant, dental hygiene student, and future hygienist. And I just wanted to talk to you today because, I haven't really given a real update in quite some time. And unintentionally, I left a cliffhanger. I said at the end of semester 3, I was like, okay, well, I have like one more session left, and I was like, I hope I make it. Well, I didn't have a chance to tell you, but I made it. I did semester 3, and now I'm at the end of semester 4, and normally I'll do episode at the beginning to kind of say like what classes I'm doing, and then at the end to say how it went, and updates in between. And let's just say semester 4 has been pretty busy. Semester 3, all I had to worry about was passing clinic. Everything else was just auditing the class. Well, yeah, semester 4, I'm like in full swing again. Like everything that I do counts towards graduating or not graduating, however you want to look at it. But that kind of changes the stakes a little bit. When you take a quiz and if you do terrible or you do really well, it really doesn't matter either way. So anyway, I had to do a lot more studying, and it was, it's just more intense, Anyway, I'm just going to talk about semester 4 as one big episode, and I'll tell you how it went. So, first of all, I will say I did pass semester 4. It didn't go smoothly like I wanted it to, but I did pass, so that's the most important thing. So for semester 4, we had clinic, and the requirements were different than semester 3. But when I was looking at them, I did notice how there are different categories of requirements, and so some of them are just a classification, like basically you'd clean a quad of MOD or 2 quads of LG. And with the light patient, I think we had to do 2 full mouth lights. One of them had to be a recall. And we had other categories like we had observations, and so we had instrument observations, which, one of them was Explorer, which I'm pretty confident with Explorer, I'd say. So that one I didn't feel like I had to prepare too much for, but we had other ones too, like an observation for doing a calc map, and I'll talk more about that in a bit. And there's other ones, like, so with a lot of observations, we also have to do a competency. And it depends on the semester. Like semester 3, we had to do a calc map observation, but we didn't have to do a competency. This semester, semester 4, there's a competency. So with observation, the instructor can give you feedback. You don't have to do like amazing, as long as you're putting in an effort and really trying to do well in that, they'll give you credit. But with the with the competency, that it requires a certain amount of skill. There's a sheet that we refer to, and so you got to get like a certain score on it, and also there's certain criteria depending on what the competency is, where if you don't do that one, even if you did everything else perfect, then you do not pass. So just one of those makes you not pass. It's pretty, it sounds a lot more intense than it is. I think the most important thing is just knowing what the requirements are and getting enough practice with it before you do the competency. And that's also why we do the observation first, is because we want to have some room to learn and to grow before we make it official and be like, okay, this is our grade. This is what we're trying to do to pass. So overall, with clinic, I mean, so after last semester, I didn't wait to the last second, but I wasn't able to find anyone to the last second to be able to get all my requirements. And I think last semester 3, I only had like LGs and mods, and I'm like, I need a light. I can't find a light. And so we had some screener days. I think it was like the second week or something. And so one of my screener patients was LG, and I was like, awesome. And then the other one ended up being a mod. And I was like, this is perfect. Okay. So I started working up those patients, and this is over like several weeks. And when I finally got to the LG patient and to classify them, I was counting how much calculus there was, and I was like, yeah, I think he totally qualifies to be an LG. Well, when my instructor came to check the classification, she said, oh no, he's a periolite. And I was like, what? Why? Like, this was my LG. And so what my instructor said was the calculus that he did have, so he had a cleaning less than a year before that appointment. And I didn't think that mattered because the calculus is still there. My instructor was saying that the calculus was softer and would come off easier. So that's why it ended up being a periolite. And I was like, well, okay. So I was pretty disappointed. And so I just had to get him done in one appointment, which wasn't that big a deal. I mean, it wasn't a big deal. Well, my mod patient, well, let me say this first. Before during the screening appointment, I am very upfront with my patients, and I say, okay, you're going to expect to be here for several appointments. Each appointment is 2.5 to 3 hours long. So, does that work for you? Does that work for your schedule? Are you able to commit to that? And of course, the patients are like, oh yeah, that's not a big deal. So my patient had 2 appointments, and then after the third appointment, well, he canceled the third appointment before we actually had it, and he's like, oh, I'm not able to do it. And I was like, okay, well, no worries, I'll take care of that. We'll get him scheduled again. And then I started texting him, and I was like, okay, I just want to get you scheduled again. Like, this is at a later time. And he wasn't responding. And I was like, okay, well, I'm not going to play games with this. I had reached out to him multiple times. No response. So I was like, okay, I just need to move on. I need to find a new patient. So I started letting our front desk lady know. She didn't have anyone for me at the time. So, I just put word out there. I talked to classmates. It was about this time where we had our mid-semester conference. And so we meet with our instructor, our block instructor, and we show where we're at with our requirements and what our plan is going forward. And so at this time, I still needed an LG and a mod. I had talked to pretty much everybody, and no one had anything for me. All the patients I had so far were just light. I had brought in a few patients that I just started doing a new patient exam on because I was like, well, first of all, I need to fill the chair because I wasn't finding anybody. And so if I got someone, I just brought them in. The front desk lady, she was able to fill my schedule here and there to just fill it with somebody. All these patients that I saw ended up being light. And I was like, well, okay, that's fine. We'll just keep doing this because statistically, one of them has to be an LG or a mod. It's got to happen. Well, I think in the first half of the semester, I had seen 9 light patients from start to finish. And I was like, well, what's going on? I can't control who sits in my chair. And we can do screening appointments, but I was putting ads out online. No one was responding to them at all. It was very strange to me. And I'm not talking about I put one ad online. I put out multiple ads on multiple platforms. You think like at least one person would respond, but I got absolutely nothing. And I have no idea why. Maybe it was timing, who knows. But anyway, I was doing what I can. I was talking, and like I would talk to people from other classes. So we have my class and then the class ahead of us that are seeing patients. And so almost on a daily basis, I was talking to everybody in my class. I was talking to everybody in the other class, and no one had anything for me. Like the other class, they were also needing mods because they have what they need for their requirements as well. For I can't remember exactly what it was, but they couldn't just hand over a mod like that. So I was like starting to get pretty anxious. I mean, I still had a few weeks left, but it wasn't looking very hopeful. Luckily, one of my classmates had a LG that I was able to see. I was hoping to get the half the mouth done, like I needed to do half. So I was hoping to get both quads done in one session, but it ended up not happening that way. And I summed over 2 appointments, which was fine. I mean, I had the appointment available, he was available, not a big deal. But I still needed the mods. So, and then at one point I did hear back from my original mod patient. So this person's also in school, and he was having finals, and so that was the only thing going on for him. So that's why I didn't hear from him. And he also said that he doesn't have the time or the patience for this long drawn out process, which I found to be frustrating because, I mean, I told him up front, I was very, very straightforward about it. I was not hiding information. I was just like, this is how it is. And yet this still happened. And, I'd rather have someone tell me early on, hey, this isn't for me. And I'd be like, okay, that's fine. But, it is what it is. So I just said, well, thank you for letting me know. I didn't give an attitude back or anything like that, but it happens, no matter how much you prepare the patient for it. Sometimes the patient gets 3 appointments in and they're like, this isn't for me. So one thing I've been learning this semester is that you need to be able to pivot. And so you may be walking into a situation where you're expecting one thing to happen and you're blindsided and you end up doing something completely different. And that did happen to me a few times. I mean, sometimes you just have to kind of live one of those experiences before you can really learn how to handle it well. I had one situation where I was joining the other cohort on their clinical session, and I just had one of my patients to finish up real quick because I was just trying to get one requirement and I was pretty much ready to go. And because I was with the other class, I was, still asking like, oh, do you have a mod? Do you have a mod? And one of my classmates did have a mod, but she wasn't able to share this one, or, I can't remember the exact situation. But I said, oh, well, I mean, I do need to get competent C for Gracie. Can I do that on your patient? And she's like, oh, okay, well, let's ask the instructor before we get started to make sure it's okay. And I was like, okay. So we're doing a huddle, and on this particular day, we did one giant huddle instead of inner blocks. I'm not sure if they were just short staff, and so that's what happened. I don't know. But anyway, when it came around to that student, she did her spiel, and then when she kind of had finished, I was kind of like trying to interject a little bit and like, oh, and also, and then she's like, right. Dak was hoping to do Gracie competency for this patient. And the instructor's like, why doesn't he just do the whole quad? And I started to be like, no, we didn't talk about this. I don't want to steal her patient. And they're like, no, I think you should do the whole quad. And it's like, I didn't even ask the other student if that was okay, and so it's like, quit. I don't know. I started like, no, I'm not trying to steal anyone's patient, so I was like, okay, well, can we talk about this separately? And so after that was pretty much the end of the huddle. So we started talking about it, and I was like, yeah, is that okay? Because I was like, I even have another patient I'm expecting, so I don't want to steal someone else's patient, nor do I want to ignore my patient because I need that patient for a requirement. And eventually they're like, okay, like the instructor was talking to me, and they're like, you need this requirement. Like, this is a golden opportunity right now that you need to take. So don't worry about the other patient right now. Let's do this. And I was like, okay. Like, I was hesitant, honestly. And I knew nothing about the patient. I didn't know what was going on. Overall, I was just kind of a strange experience for me. Anyway, so when I went into that, first of all, the patient had to get a few steps before we could even start scaling. Meanwhile, the patient was having trouble getting numb, and I'm watching the clock because I have a final that day. So I had to, be quick. I didn't have much time. It wasn't looking like it was getting to be a realistic situation, but I was told I was doing this. So I'm like, okay, just go for it. But of course, like, I went into that appointment kind of like with my adrenaline running and, not as calm as I should have been. So I didn't get much of that quad done at all. So, and it wasn't my fault. It was just, it was not the ideal situation, but I at least had to go for it, but it was a mod 4. That's a tough case. So, I did what I was told, and it didn't work out, but that's okay. Like, at least I wasn't like, oh, I'm not doing that, like just being very opposed to it. Anyway, it came down to the very last session, and I had so first of all, let me back up a little bit. So about a week before the end of the semester, maybe a week and a half before the end of the semester, I took a different approach to putting ads out online because I'm like, well, get ready for patients for next semester, if I make it, which I hate having that mentality, but I didn't want to, if I did make it, I didn't want to put myself out where I didn't have any patients. So I was just preparing. But I thought so I use Reddit a lot to put out ads. And I was like, maybe I just need to change my approach. So I started using AI. I used ChatGPT. And I was like, okay, what does a Reddit user in my area look for in something, a post they would want to respond to? And basically, the result that I got was they want you to be straightforward, get to the point, but they also want it to be personal. And then thinking back on it, I was like, okay, well, my ads that I put out, it almost seems like it was put out by a corporate office where it, like, very professional, very polished, and I started thinking about it. I'm like, well, maybe that's why. I'm putting ads out on Reddit. It's not like a LinkedIn or some professional website. So I gotta be on the other people's level. So I had one created that was like not nearly as polished. Usually I do a picture with mine to help draw attention. I did no picture. Within 24 hours, I'd say I probably got 6 people responding, and not all of them were potential patients, but I got responses after a couple times putting out ads and getting no response. And this was just, I think I put it in just one group. So, I was getting a lot more result by changing the way I did it. And so I'm going to do an episode about finding patients, putting ads out online and stuff like that. So I'll talk more about that later. Anyway, so I had some patients, and one person reached out and they're like, oh, I haven't been in like 10 years. And I was like, but this person's not even started. In order to get to the part where I can't even start scaling, there's a lot of steps that need to happen before I can do that. So I was like, I don't even know if I should pursue this. But then when I was getting near the end of the semester, I was desperate. And I'm like, if I can at least get a patient, like maybe I can work with my instructors. Maybe there's something we can do. So on my last session, they wanted me to screen a bunch of patients, which I tried to. I could only get one person. You know, for some people, it was that session was not compatible with their schedule. That's okay. Some people just didn't respond. You know, that's okay, because I mean, if in the future you have them as a patient and they don't respond to your confirmations, you probably don't want a patient like that. So I brought in this patient, and I mean, I was like, okay, 10 years, and the patient, you know, he was kind of worried, but like he said he took good care of his teeth, but I was like, well, that's very subjective. So I thought I'd toss the dice, just bring him in, see what happens. So I did an initial screening. So that's just a very quick idea, no x-rays, anything like that. He ended up being a mod, and I was like, this is perfect. So I just jumped into the new patient appointment with the exams and got as far as I could in that appointment. And so when I talked to my instructor at the end of the session, I told her what happened, and it turned out there was another patient that they were a new patient that got classified, and they also ended up being a mod. So now I had two options. So we had to like coordinate everything. They granted me one more session, and so I was like, okay, perfect. As long as I can get one of them in the chair, and the other patient was a mod 3, so much easier than a mod 4. So this was, 2 days after the semester ended. And just by the way, if you do end up in a situation where you need to see a patient after the semester ends, instructors typically are not too thrilled about it. They want to help you, but they don't want to roll out the red carpet for you either. So if you have this opportunity, definitely tell your instructor how grateful you are. Thank them, because this is, if you didn't have this last session, you wouldn't pass the semester. So yes, be thankful, thank them. Anyway, once I knew I had a patient, I wasn't even worried about how the actual appointment would go, because I was like, well, I know I have the skill. I made sure. So because it was in the afternoon, I came in extra early. I spent time sharpening my instruments. I wanted them to be like in pristine condition just for this cleaning, because so for this quad, I had to hand scale. So I can't just rely on the Cavitron or whatever, but I knew I had the skill for it. So I just sharpened my instruments, got it ran through. So when the patient showed up, I was ready to go. And honestly, that went really well. Before we start scaling, the instructor has a look around because they want to know how you did. If they hadn't looked at the quad yet, and when you have them check, they're like, oh, there's 3 pieces there, that they have nothing to compare it to. But if they look into it before and they're like, oh, this is like insane, and then you get down to 3 pieces, they're like, oh, wow, you came a long way. So that's why it's so important for your instructor to check in before you start scaling. So, and I had to get a technique observation done. So that was part of it. I got it done, and it was done, and I got my sign-offs. I was very happy. But I went into the semester with the goal of getting all my requirements done by week 10. And because I didn't have an LG or mod, there's a bunch of observations and competencies I couldn't do because, you can't use a Gracie on a light patient. That's a misuse of instruments. It could cause damage to the patient. So I never got any feedback about that. I think the instructors understood I wasn't trying to not do the observations or the competencies. It was just a matter of I didn't have the right situation where I could do that. Anyway, it was a lot of work. I did not quit. Because I remember before I found out I had my last patient, I told one of my classmates, I'm not going down without a fight. Like, yes, hygiene school is hard, but if I go down, I'm not going to make it easy, and I don't look at it as me against the instructors or me against my classmates. It's me against the requirements. It's me against my degree. And so I'm not quitting. I'm going to go as fast as not as fast, but I'm not going to let it take me down. Let's just put it that way. So that's basically clinic in a nutshell. We had other classes too. We have our dental hygiene theory class, which we go over certain things like how to use the Cavitron. So that was probably the most exciting thing about this semester for that class, is because the Cavitron, that we didn't get to use it in semester 3. So semester 4, getting to use the Cavitron is like, yeah, like I'm a hygienist now. Like, yeah. So it's funny, when I first started using it, for the most part, I felt like it wasn't doing anything. But a lot of the patients I was working on were light, so it's hard to notice a difference. When I was working on that mod 4, the patient that I didn't really get to do much with, there was some lower anterior calculus, and so I got to really get in there and get all that removed, and that is when I saw it actually working. So, I wouldn't not use it with a light patient, but you feel like you're doing more with the Cavitron when it's a LG or a mod. So we get to learn a few different things. I never felt like that class was really, it wasn't anything new, but it wasn't anything, I think it was just kind of going deeper on some certain things. One other thing we also did was a tobacco cessation project. And so we were able to go over the 5 A's and the 5 R's. And so the 5 A's, oh, now I'm forgetting which one's which. I think it's the 5 R's, actually. I need to review them, obviously. But one is if they decide that they want to quit smoking. So the 5 A's would be ask, assess, etc., because I forget them off the top of my head. But you basically, it's if you ask them if they want to quit, and if they do, how to assist them through that process. But if you kind of go through the first or second step and you kind of get the impression they're not ready yet, then you go through the 5 R's, which is kind of, food for thought. Like, we're going to discuss this. I'm going to tell you why it's important. And also, we're just going to ask you at every appointment. So that's where like the repetition comes in from the 5 R's. And, we kind of approach it as we're not here to look down on you and shame you for being a smoker or using tobacco. It's more, we want to work with you. If the patient's willing, that's already a huge step. If they're not willing, we're just doing our due diligence, telling them this is why this is important for you to quit. But if they're not ready, we did our part, and we'll just keep asking them at every appointment. That's what we got to do. So, and because I've done that, now I can talk to my patients in clinic, and we do have some sign-offs where it involves doing tobacco cessation. So that's great. I can do that with my patients now. And I actually do have 1 or 2 patients in mind that hopefully I'll be able to use that next semester. One of the other classes we had was nutrition and cardiology. And I actually found this class to be very fascinating. I'm already very interested in nutrition in general. I always like to think I eat healthier, but I also do not discriminate against cake or candy. It's just about a time and a place. I love ice cream. So That's one of my guilty pleasures, I guess. But it's with this class, we are able to learn the process behind, what nutrients we need to create gingiva for different processes in the body, and why it's important for our overall health and our oral health. And we also want to be able to do nutritional counseling with our patients in clinic and in our career when we graduate. And we had this one project at the very end where we had classmates, and we had to fill out like several pieces of paper. We kept a log for, I think it was 5 days, of what we ate, also our activity level, and we did like the risk assessment that you normally would do in clinic anyway. And we put all this information together, and then we created a video about nutritional counseling with our patients. And so we highlight what a patient is doing good, or what they're doing well, I should say. And so like, oh, hey, I see that you have this, which is very nutritious, and that's awesome that you're doing that. Or like habits, like, oh, like if you go on a walk every day, that's awesome. Like you definitely want to emphasize that, because you don't want to come across as nothing but shaming someone. That's not what we're about. We're about working with our patients and, helping them work towards their optimal health. So it was actually a very fascinating project. I think in reality, when we do nutritional counseling with our patients, we're probably touching on one thing at a time. And so the most important thing is you want to work with the patient. You want to ask them questions, open-ended questions. So instead of saying, do you eat quinoa? I'm sure some people will be like, I don't know what that is. But you'll get a yes or no answer for the most part. But one thing we can do is like, okay, so I notice, hey, you don't get a whole lot of vegetables. Are there any vegetables that you do like that maybe you could incorporate into your meals? And they're like, oh yeah, well, I really enjoy cucumber. So it's like, oh, okay, well, we can somehow work that in. Or if they like celery, be like, oh, celery and peanut butter, that's nutritious. And then it's also part of the reason why we do the nutritional counseling is because we also want to tell them about the acid attacks. And if you drink some beverage that's not water between meals, it's going to be giving your teeth a constant acid attack. As opposed to if you just drink something like that at mealtime, it limits it and then gives your mouth a lot longer, or I guess your teeth a lot longer to recover. More time to recover. That's what I'm trying to say. Anyway, so the class is very detailed. There's a lot of details that I feel like are relevant we may not share all this information with our patients, but it's helping us create a bigger picture in our mind of why all this information is important. And if a patient's like, well, why do I need vitamin A? Then we'll actually know the answer and be able to tell them why. So that's just a quick overview with nutrition. I've heard in the past some people thought nutrition was the hardest class. I remember, I think I was in second semester, and we saw some other people, they clearly just got out of an exam, and we're like, oh, what class is that for? And they're like, oh, it was nutrition. And they just looked like they had been through the ringer. Like it seemed brutal. And I was like, I mean, I like the idea of nutrition. But then I was like, well, it seems a really tough class. But then I talked to some other people and they're like, oh, well, if you like nutrition, it's easy. And I was like, there's nothing really easy in hygiene school. So having experienced it for myself, and again, I do enjoy the aspect of nutrition just for my own health. So it was a good class. I do know some classmates did find it to be challenging, and I found it to be challenging too. But it's a very good class. I found it to be fascinating, so I liked it. The next class I'm going to talk about is pain management. And this is where we start learning more detailed information about local anesthetic and we start doing injections. And, I kind of was looking forward to, but also dreading this class because I thought, like sticking needles in someone's mouth and, as a patient, I get very tense. And so I was like, how's this going to go? I talked to some people before and they're like, oh yeah, after like a week or two, it doesn't bother you anymore. And I was like, oh, okay. And like in general, I'm very nervous about needles. So I was like, okay, this will be interesting. Like I can't imagine myself not being nervous about it. I would say personally, I'm still nervous about it. I I don't know. I'm just that kind of person. Like I make a good patient, but I just know like when the injection's happening, I'm just very tense and you put a lot of trust into the person that's getting you numb. So I would say I probably did better as a clinician. There's some injections. So the PSA is one that we have to do for our national boards. And that's probably the hardest injection that we have to do. You have to learn the left and the right separately because the techniques are different. And I don't know, it's because it's so far back in the mouth and you have to go at such a angle. If you have the right patient and their cheeks are stretchy and, it's probably a lot easier to do. But, we got to work on all patients, so we got to learn how to do it. But I've also heard that doing the PSA in clinical practice after school is not that common because if you're working on a molar, you might infiltrate instead. But, everyone's different. It was funny because in our very first class, our instructor said, oh, you cannot miss a session because you'll fall behind. We have so many requirements to do for this class and, we don't have much time. So we just need to go through, don't miss anything, any classes, any lab sessions. So I was like, okay, I'm determined. I'm not going to miss any. Well, then I got sick and then I couldn't go to class. And I was like, really, literally the first one. So when I was talking with the instructor, she said, well, it is early on. So she's like, it's not that big a deal. So, I mean, the first 3 weeks, maybe I was behind, but I was able to get caught up. And, I think one of the biggest thing is talking with the instructors. When we're in our lab session, there's probably like 4 or 5 instructors that go around. And so you're in pairs and then you take turns being the patient and the clinician. And when you talk to the other instructors, you're like, hey, I need to get like at least 3 today so I can get caught up. Usually they can kind of wiggle a little bit, like allow some wiggle room. I think communication is probably one of the most important things with your instructors, to let them know where you're at and to know what your goals are. Because if you're just like, hey, can I do one more? They're like, oh, there's not much time. But if you tell them earlier and you're like, hey, I'm a little bit behind, I just want to get caught up, is there time to do one more injection? They may look at the clock and they're like, okay, but you have to be ready to go like now. It's like, okay, so you have to be ready to do that. We also have to do some verbiage before, so we have to say where the injection site is, where the, like how deep you go with the needles, so like how many millimeters, or like 2/3, half, whatever, how much you're depositing, what structures get anesthetized. I think that's everything. And so, because this is important information to know when you're like, if you're working in clinical practice and the doctor's like, hey, I'm doing a filling on like number 18, get the patient numb for me. Or if they're working on upper tooth, or working on number 4. So you need to know which injections to do so that way you can get the patient numb and the doctor will be happy, you'll be happy, the patient will be happy. I think that's probably the most important thing. Anyway, we also got to learn about nitrous, and in order to practice nitrous, we had to be the patient as well as the clinician. So for one session, and like when I say we got to be on nitrous, but when I say we're on nitrous, it was just for like 5 minutes maybe. It was a very quick time. So when I was the patient, school was stressful. And once the nitrous started kicking in, I was like, wow, I feel absolutely no anxiety. It's just like, oh, I see why some people kind of get addicted to this stuff. But I don't normally have nitrous when I'm the patient because I feel like I don't need it. But, if it's for free, why not? Anyway, so that was pain management. And I'll say one last thing about the class too. There's 2 parts to the class. So there's the lecture portion. So that's where we're just in the classroom. It's just like a regular class where we do a lecture, assignments, all that stuff. Then we have the lab portion where we review. So we have like a short a short lecture to review whatever injection we're going to be doing that day. And then we go out and into the clinic and we do those injections. So yeah, that's kind of pain management in a nutshell. We had general/oral pathology. And so this class was very strange for me, not because of the topic, but because of just, I don't know, my perspective on it, I guess. I felt like the first couple weeks were review stuff we already learned. And then at some point, it just kind of transitioned into new things, but it was gradual. And I just kind of felt like in general, I didn't know what was going on in the class. I was just, but it was one of my best grades. And I kept thinking like, well, I'm glad that I'm doing well in this class, but I have no idea why, because I'm like, if you're just asked point blank, okay, here's this condition, give me the symptoms, what are the clinical signs of this? I'd be like, I don't know. And see, the thing is, like, when we're working in clinical practice, we don't necessarily have to know what particular, like if we notice something unusual in a patient's mouth, we don't necessarily have to know exactly what that thing is, but we need to identify abnormalities, and then there's also like variations of normal, which those aren't a problem, but it's specifically what is unusual. So, it's important to know this stuff, but they're also going to be working with a dentist who knows this stuff hopefully better than we do. And we can just point out, be like, oh, I wanted you to have a look at, the gum area of number 18. And then the dentist can look at it and be like, oh, yeah, let's see. It looks like, it could potentially be this, or, we may want to have a closer look at it. Because with some pathologies, you can't make a diagnosis until you do a biopsy. And when it comes back, that's when we're able to figure out what exactly we're looking at. And this class covers many different things. So there's a lot of pathologies where you look at it and on the tongue or on the mucosa, you see something that's unusual. But then there's also seeing something radiographically. So sometimes there's something you see, but sometimes it's just a variation of normal, or, it's nothing to be concerned of. But then there's also things that we should be concerned of. So it's important to help differentiate that. If you see a variation of normal, depending on what it is, you may want to still point it out to the dentist, but it's just important to recognize these things. So, overall, I did well in that class. It was a class. And I will finally talk about our restorative lab. So, as you may remember from last semester, we worked on just amalgams. This semester, we actually got to start working on composite, which I was kind of excited about. But of course, I have no experience with composites, so it was challenging because it's a lot different than than amalgam. Amalgam, you pack it in, and then you kind of take some away, you scrape it away. With composite, it's not like that, because when you cure it, you don't take away from it. It is, you have to pack it to the line, not over. And that's one thing I had trouble getting. It was a tough class. It really was. I noticed with my loupes, like especially if you're doing a mandibular tooth, you're looking at the tooth from one angle. And so even when I'm like, okay, there's no high margins, everything looks good, and then I cure it, and then I'd start working with it after to kind of polish it up and stuff, then I'd be like, oh, there's like a huge extra piece here that I couldn't see. And then I was like, well, why didn't I see it before? And then I look at it from another angle and I'm like, oh, that's why. So if you haven't done composite yet, make sure, because you're using the orange light too, so that also makes it a little harder to see. There's less contrast. And the fact that the material is the same color as the tooth, there's just less contrast overall. So make sure you look at it from different angles, because if you do that, you might catch things that you wouldn't see otherwise. And it's also valuable information to get feedback from your instructors. So we have the option of doing a tooth or a filling for a sign-off. However, if you're not super confident on it, you can just have feedback, which means that you won't get graded on it, but it won't count towards requirements. So that's why the thing is, if you do one and it doesn't pass, the next one that you do, your grade goes down. So like they'll grade it and then they'll take 5 points off or something like that, just because it's to encourage you to get it sooner, but also having the discernment to know whether this is a quality filling or not. Before we have our tooth graded, on the sheet, we mark down what we think our grade should be. And so we're given a lot of criteria, like, is there a minus? Is there excess? How is the marginal ridge? How is the central groove? We can say it's underdeveloped, or how are your fossa? If those things don't meet the high standards, then you have to mark yourself. Well, you don't have to, but to be more accurate, you want to mark yourself down. So if you're seeing like, oh, there's like 5 or 6 things that I would be marked down on, then maybe just ask for an observation for feedback. So doing that over and over again, because I would get the same feedback, so I try to work on that, and then get a little better. But then there's sometimes where like, oh, I'm doing awesome on this tooth here, or like this filling here, and then I do another one, and then that next one isn't so great. So it's all about learning to do the skill, learning to do it consistently, and knowing if it's a good filling or not before you even have it graded. So there's a lot of skills that you're learning to develop that are not straightforward skills like doing a filling. You have to learn to self-assess, which this goes for anything you do in dental hygiene. You want to self-assess and determine, is this the kind of filling I would want for my mouth? Is this something a patient would be happy with? So it was not an easy class, but I'm glad it's done. And we are going to continue next semester. I believe next semester we're going to have 2 clinical sessions, or not clinical, but 2 lab sessions where we're able to practice and get our requirements in. So I think that's good. I think that, we're going to get a whole nother semester practice before we start working on actual patients. Semester 6, one of our classes is restorative on a patient. So that's something to look forward to. And I think that, I think that's something we should work towards. Some people are like, I never want to do this in clinical practice. I kind of feel that way, but I also don't want to just go out and say that because I'm still early on. When I'm in semester 6, I can make a better determination if this is something I want to do for my career. And who knows, maybe after I become good at it, I'll be like, actually, this is kind of awesome. The funny thing for me about this whole restorative class is this is part of the reason why I wanted to become a hygienist, is so I could do this. And now that I'm doing it, it's not so much fun. But I mean, if you're doing something that's not something you're skilled at, then of course you're not going to want to do it going forward. But when you start getting good at it, your opinion may change. So if you're not good at something now, don't let that determine how you feel about it in the future. Just say, okay, I'm not super good at this right now, but there's a lot of room to grow. I still have some time to improve my skill. And when you are doing this skill, so whether it be restorative or maybe it's using a certain instrument, be mindful of your technique, kind of analyze while you're doing it. So like if you're using a Gracie, think to yourself, like there's, I think, a handful of things that you want to consider, like the patient's position, the chair position, if you're using the fulcrum, that kind of stuff, where your fulcrum should be. When you put all that stuff together, I know it seems very basic and like so semester 1, but when you put all that stuff together and you're like, oh, well, now I can determine, oh, I need to change my chair position, or, oh, my fulcrum should be over here, not over there. I think that is what's going to make you a much better clinician overall. And I'm sure even when you're working in practice, there's going to be times where you're like, oh, I can tell my technique is not ideal for this. Let me stop and analyze why. And I'm sure in the future, there's going to be some point where you're like, you don't even think about it. You see something and you're like, that's not right. Like, you don't even have to go through the whole process and all these steps to figure that out. So I hope that everyone is enjoying their hygiene journey along with me. I remember it was probably near the end of the semester. And, sometimes there are just some days where you're like, everything just sucks, But I mean, I was chatting with someone and they were saying something about that. And I was like, well, I mean, overall life is really good. There's just a few things that I'm not too excited about, but it's not determining my happiness. I know it's kind of hard to, like when hygiene school is your whole life and there's not really much outside of that, it's hard to not get down when you're not doing as well as you want to. But, here's something that I've been thinking about and I've been wanting to share on the podcast. What we're doing when we see patients in clinic, we are making a difference in their lives. They could have chosen to go to a regular dental office and have a graduated dental hygienist who's been working for 20 years, let's say, work on their teeth and, get them done in one appointment maybe. But they made the decision to go to the school and to see you. They could have, even if they came to the school, they could say, can I have someone else be my clinician? But, they stuck with it. And if that does happen, don't read too much into it, because sometimes people have the weirdest reasons why they don't want to see someone. But the most important thing is you are making a difference in their life. You are helping them towards better oral health. And, that's why we have our instructors there, because yes, we can do a great job, but I mean, we're still learning. It's not going to be perfect. And even from what I hear in clinical practice, you're not going to get every single piece of calculus. It's not realistic. We don't have the time for it, nor do we have all the tools I can get. Sometimes the pockets are just super deep, and no matter what you do, there's only so much you can do. But know that you are making a difference in people's lives. And even as a student, it still matters, and you're still helping them. And I just want to leave you with that encouragement today, because, sometimes we're like, oh, we're students, like, it's not to be taken as seriously, but I disagree. I think that it should be taken seriously. And so next time you're feeling down on yourself, if you're having a tough time in clinic, know that you still are giving value to this patient. So I will leave it there. And I hope you have a wonderful time in school. I don't know where you are in your journey, but I know for me, it feels like it's been a long journey, and people are saying, oh, you're in your second year. Oh, it's going to go by so fast. And I just reply, I hope it would, because I'm tired. But really, this is a valuable time. We're developing our skills. We're perfecting our skills. And I think that is something worth noting. So anyway, I'm going to leave it there, and you all have a great day. Enjoy your dental hygiene journey, and I'm going to keep my positive attitude going for mine. Anyway, this is Dax Ska. Headed out. See you next time.
Thank you for listening to my dental hygiene school experience. You can find Dak on Instagram and TikTok by searching for dakska.dental. If you have questions for Dak, you can send him a message on Instagram or TikTok, or you can email him at dakskadental@gmail.com. Our host is Dax Ska, and I'm the announcer Nigel, telling you to stay nerdy and brush your teeth. My name is Nigel, and I want to take a moment to tell you about today's sponsor, Dental Floss. Did you know that brushing alone misses 30% of each tooth? If you spend 1 minute a day flossing, you will greatly reduce your chances of getting cavities between your teeth. That means you spend less money getting fillings at the dentist, and your teeth and gums are happier. If you want to impress your dental hygienist, floss like a boss.